This is Franklin Rye, and welcome back to Political Spirits. We still stand for the proposition that the left and the right should have a few drinks and talk. Compromise is not a requirement. If those discussions result in us changing or even abandoning our positions, that's fine. If they don't, that's fine too. We just need to talk to each other. In that way, we can unify through speech. And if the discussion becomes a bit heated, at the end of the night, we should still be able to split up the bar tab and be on our way. So what are we going to talk about this week? Well, there's a number of subjects I could talk about this week. Most of them range from disappointing to disturbing to horrific. I want to start with something more inspirational. We're often disappointed by our elected officials. We often question their ethics, and with good reason. We often question their morals, and with good reason. We often question their motivations, and with good reason. And perhaps most of all, we often question their sincerity, and with good reason. But we sometimes forget that many of them had other lives before they became politicians. They may have been lawyers or educators or business persons, and a fair number of them are veterans, having served in the armed forces, in some instances for long terms, even a full 20 years. And as we think negatively of politicians in America, it's easy to forget that sometimes in their lives they've exhibited the quality that is perhaps most rare and most precious in a country when the chips are down: bravery, almost unlimited bravery. When I handled governmental affairs, a greater percentage of my time was spent at the state and local level than at the federal level. But I did spend a fair amount of time at the federal level. And one of the elected officials I met was Daniel Inouye, the senator from Hawaii who passed away in 2012. For those who don't know of him, during his time in office he was missing his right arm. I knew that he'd been injured in World War II. I assumed that was when he lost his arm, but I didn't know the details. When I met him, I was struck by his demeanor. He carried himself in a very dignified way. He was stately. I wondered whether he seemed like an elder statesman even when he was young. After I met him, I researched his military background. Daniel Inouye was a Japanese American. He served in World War II, but because of his Japanese heritage, he was not allowed to serve in the Pacific Theater, and instead fought in Europe. Because of his Japanese heritage, Inouye was not allowed to enlist the first time he tried to do so. After the Army dropped its prohibition against Japanese Americans serving, he was able to enlist in 1943. Before doing so, he'd been studying pre-med at the University of Hawaii. He volunteered for the Nisei 442nd Regimental Combat Team. It was comprised of Japanese American volunteers. They included Japanese American soldiers who were already in the U.S. Army before the war started, those from states outside of the West Coast exclusion zone, Hawaii, and those from internment camps. While his unit was serving in France, they were tasked with a mission to rescue 400 U.S. infantry that were surrounded by German forces. The 442nd suffered over 800 casualties, but was able to rescue 211 men. Inouye's company, I Company, consisted of 185 men. Only 8 of them walked out without being wounded. Similar horrific casualty rates were suffered by other companies on the extremely treacherous mission. While leading an attack, Inouye was struck by a German round just above his heart, but 2 silver dollars in his shirt pocket stopped it. 3 members of the 442nd were awarded the Medal of Honor for that mission, but because of discrimination at the time against Japanese Americans, they didn't receive their medals until the year 2000. During a mission in Italy, while attacking a German defensive line, Inouye and his unit were pinned down by German machine gunners, and Sergeant Inouye was shot in the stomach. But that didn't stop him, even after he was advised how badly he'd been wounded. He continued to fight and destroyed 2 German machine gun nests with grenades. He then crawled towards a 3rd machine gun nest with covering fire provided by his men. As Inouye was preparing to throw a grenade at the 3rd machine gun nest, a German grenade exploded and nearly completely severed his right arm from his body. Then, Inouye had the presence of mind to use his left hand to pry the grenade out of his right hand, which was now severed from his body, throw it into the machine gun nest, and continue to fire at German soldiers with his Thompson submachine gun one-handed. That's incredible. It doesn't even seem real. It seems like something out of an over-the-top Hollywood movie. But it wasn't. It was real life. Inouye received the Distinguished Service Cross for his bravery, which was later upgraded to the Congressional Medal of Honor. Much of the details I presented come from an article in BusinessInsider.com dated March 26, 2018, entitled 13 Incredible Stories of American Servicemen Who Were Awarded the Medal of Honor, the military's highest honor, and from an article at nps.gov entitled Daniel Inouye, A Japanese-American Soldier's Valor in World War II. Whenever you think that all politicians are shallow or phony or lacking in substance, think of the late Senator Inouye to reassure yourself that there can be much more to them. And Senator Inouye was not alone. Other congressmen and senators have served in the military with bravery and honor. In the current Congress, they include 3 veterans who were wounded in combat and who posed for a photo on the first day of the new Congress. Representative Jim Baird from Indiana, who lost his left arm in the Vietnam War. Representative Brian Mast of Florida, who lost the lower part of both legs in Afghanistan. And Representative Dan Crenshaw from Texas, who lost his right eye while serving as a Navy SEAL in Afghanistan. That photo includes one of my favorite captions of all time, in the form of a tweet from Representative Brian Mast. Quote, 5 eyes, 5 arms, 4 legs, all American. Close quote. Next topic. Anti-Trump bigotry comes to Gainesville. As I discussed in multiple prior episodes, bigotry is defined as intolerance towards those who hold different opinions from oneself. When the Democrat Party chose to label opposition to the presidency of Donald Trump as, quote, the resistance, close quote, they promoted a belief that somehow the country was an occupied territory, rather than a country being governed by someone who they opposed, who they lost to in a democratic election. What it has turned into is widespread bigotry against supporters of Donald Trump. We've seen it in the form of attacks on those who choose to wear Make America Great Again hats or other Trump gear. We've seen it in the form of refusing to serve in bars and restaurants individuals wearing Trump gear or otherwise openly supporting the president. We've seen it in the form of theft of promotional materials and preventing speakers from expressing support for President Trump or conservative causes. And now it comes to Gainesville, Florida, on the campus of the University of Florida. Students in the Young Americans for Freedom chapter filmed other students cutting down and walking away with, apparently stealing, their Build the Wall banner. The Young Americans for Freedom members advised that they had obtained a permit to display the banner. The first banner they hung, they advised, was stolen within hours after it was erected. They then erected a second banner, and shortly thereafter a group of students attempted but failed to tear it down, and the YAF students followed them, filming them with their cell phones. The students being followed gave the usual excuses for their conduct, equating a banner that says "Build the Wall" with violence, and incredibly, one of the students being filmed contended that the banner threatens her right to live and that wanting a border is violence. My primary source for information on this event was the WashingtonExaminer.com and an article by Anthony Leonardi from March 12, 2019, entitled Conservative Students File Police Reports After Their Build the Wall Banners Are Stolen. Keep in mind that the University of Florida is a well-respected academic institution. It's difficult to obtain admission to UF, and U.S. News ranks it as the 8th best public university in the country. How is it that at such an august institution you have students advocating the lunacy that displaying a sign that says "Build the Wall" threatens her right to live and that wanting a border is violence? Both of those beliefs are demonstrably false. But I know that it's unfair to attribute those beliefs to the University of Florida itself. This particular video involved only 2 students, and only one of them expressed those particular thoughts. Although I suspect, but do not know, that if questioned, the other one criticizing the sign would support the same beliefs. Moreover, unfortunately, this nonsense exists at campuses around the country. There was another incident at the Gainesville campus where the banner was actually torn down and removed by the objecting students, and the Young Americans for Freedom members were able to film the students cutting down and carrying away the banner, in the process cutting down an unrelated gymnastics banner and apparently damaging the hanging system for banners at the location. In this instance, the student who objected to the banner is filmed carrying it away after it was cut down, and that student contends that she has the right to take it as part of her right to free speech. So now we have a student at an august university contending that the right to free speech includes the right to commit theft. The Young Americans for Freedom students filed complaints with the campus police department, and 3 police reports were taken. The president of UF Young Americans for Freedom, Sarah Long, issued a press release which included the statement, quote, "UF has failed in its responsibility to be a marketplace of ideas, instead becoming a bastion of anti-free speech activism. Not only has the university censored YAF to the point where a First Amendment lawsuit was our only remedy, but students now are so threatened by the concept of intellectual diversity that they're willing to destroy not only YAF's property, but any property that might get in the way of their destruction." Close quote. The YAF members who videotaped the events, Dylan Finnegan, Victor Santos, and Philip Smith, conducted themselves with great restraint and deserve our thanks and respect for documenting the activities of students who apparently just can't tolerate such speech with which they disagree. Are these events unique to the University of Florida? Unfortunately, we all know the answer. They are not. For another recent example of this kind of conduct, look to thecollegefix.com for details regarding the University of Minnesota, Morris, where the college Republicans use a hidden camera to catch students removing their flyers or drawing big X's through them. In all, they claim that over 50 of their posters were taken down or vandalized while the camera was in place. They submitted their evidence to the campus police. A spokesperson for the college later advised the College Fix that once the investigation was complete, the evidence was turned over to the Stevens County Attorney's Office. She advised that the County Attorney's Office would determine how to proceed. We'll see how they proceed. We'll have to wait and see what happens at the University of Florida as well. The university has put out a statement saying that they support free speech. If they're serious about it, they need to impose severe penalties on the students who actually stole the banner and also those who attempted to steal the banner. Independently of any criminal penalties, the university needs to adopt a policy that basically results in a suspension for such conduct on the first instance and expulsion if it happens again. Until universities start cracking down, we're not going to see the end of this. Next topic. The left wants to use banks as a political weapon. When you think about things that are ubiquitous in our society, the things that you just expect to be around, banks are one of them. Whether in the form of the ATM, which you expect to be available every few miles if you live in a populated suburb or the city, or just banking services provided online. Even if you almost never set foot in a brick-and-mortar banking location, we expect banking services to be there. And that expectation for banking services to be there doesn't just exist among individual Americans. It exists within businesses as well. Companies expect to be able to obtain banking services in America, to obtain financing. We are, after all, the largest economy in the world. With that in mind, you can imagine how shocked I was to listen to Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez questioning the CEO of Wells Fargo. Incredibly, AOC asked the Wells Fargo CEO whether the bank should be held responsible for damages resulting from climate change because it provides financing for fossil fuel projects such as the Dakota Access Pipeline. She then explains that she's talking about the bank being held responsible for oil spills, building of seawalls because of rising sea levels, and wildfires purportedly resulting from climate change. When the CEO responds that he's not aware of any such adverse results arising from the construction of the Dakota Access Pipeline, she quickly responds, "What about leaks from the pipeline?" To which he responds, "I'm not aware of any leaks." She replies that she's speaking hypothetically, and that if there was a leak from the Dakota Access Pipeline, quote, "why shouldn't Wells Fargo pay for the cleanup, since it paid for the construction of the pipeline itself?" Close quote. The CEO's response was, quote, "because we don't operate the pipeline. We provide financing." Close quote. Every American should be terrified by AOC's question. She's only a freshman congresswoman, but she has 3.5 million followers on Twitter, and Democrat congressional leadership is seemingly incapable of controlling her. If in fact banks making loans to industrial enterprises were responsible for industrial accidents like pipeline leaks, there would be no loans made to industrial enterprises. It would shut down that portion of the economy. And keep in mind that one of the aspects of our economy which has allowed us to surge ahead of the rest of the world in recent years is the incredible expansion of our oil and gas industry because of fracking. AOC's philosophy with regard to bank liability would destroy our economy. And AOC doesn't end her questioning there. She asked why Wells Fargo financed the pipeline when it was, quote, "widely seen as environmentally unstable," close quote. So what does widely seen as environmentally unstable mean? It means that the pipeline received all the required governmental approvals and survived all legal challenges. But the environmental activists who AOC supports and who support AOC didn't like it. Think about what she's doing here. She's threatening a bank for choosing to issue loans to companies building a legal project with all required approvals, and she's making the threat because she doesn't like the project. For all the hand-wringing and pearl-clutching about Donald Trump's supposedly authoritarian actions and tendencies, the words uttered by AOC in this hearing are far more threatening to the future of our economy and our system of government than anything Donald Trump has ever done. The words of AOC reveal the authoritarian tendencies of the left. They want absolute control of banking, issuing loans to legal projects with all required legal approvals and that have survived all legal challenges and for which there is no evidence that they are not financially viable, is simply not acceptable if the projects don't comport with the left's view of what is desirable. This is all the more reason why, for the good of the country and the Democratic Party, it must lose in a landslide if it nominates a leftist as its presidential candidate in 2020. Next topic. The peace of New Zealand is shattered. Whenever I've thought about New Zealand over the years, I've always thought of a peaceful country, of natural beauty, of a society living with much less of the hustle and bustle with which we must contend every day. I've always thought of beautiful mountains, lovely towns, and great trout fishing. I also think of New Zealand as the home of great sailors. I was once on a chartered sailboat watching the America's Cup races in San Diego, where the challenger was the New Zealand team. I'm not big into sailing. I've always preferred an outboard engine where you can just push the throttle forward to go faster, not try to finagle a sail to take advantage of the wind for an extra knot of speed. For me, the big thrill of being out there was I was able to hear the American skipper, Dennis Conner, on the VHF radio, which I thought was really cool. But if I knew anything about sailing, I would have realized that the real thrill was witnessing the prowess of the New Zealand team, which was tremendous. Not once have I ever thought of or envisioned New Zealand as a place where mass murder would occur, but that has changed now. On Friday, 50 worshippers at two mosques, Al Noor Mosque and Linwood Islamic Center in Christchurch, New Zealand, were killed, and 34 wounded remain in Christchurch Hospital, with 12 still in critical condition. Additionally, a child in critical condition is hospitalized in Auckland at a different medical center. The mass murderer who perpetrated this terrorist attack has already been apprehended. He posted a manifesto before the attack. It's available online. I hate the idea of reading it because I don't want to give this maniac anything that he desires. The problem is that so much of the media is driven by their own desire to advance their particular narrative rather than to investigate and get to the truth. As I watched and listened to the coverage, it became apparent that many outlets, including CNN, were playing up a purported connection between the views of this mass-murdering terrorist and Donald Trump. Other new media sites on the Internet were taking a different tack and noting that the shooter had multiple conflicting philosophies, which were divulged in the manifesto. In the end, I concluded that to be able to cover this issue at all on the podcast, I needed to read the manifesto. So I did. In it, the killer attacked immigrants, Muslims, and Jews. In the manifesto, he also claimed to be an eco-fascist, made clear he was racist, made clear he wanted nothing to do with conservatives, and said that communist China was the country that most aligned with his views. He claims to be both left-wing and right-wing, quote, depending upon the definition, close quote. He states that he may be a socialist, depending on the definition. He describes himself as having previously been a communist, an anarchist, a libertarian, and now an eco-fascist. His racism extends to ethnic nationalism. He says that he is a supporter of Donald Trump, quote, as a symbol of renewed white identity, close quote, but, quote, dear God, no, close quote, as to policies and leadership. He wants different races in different countries, and expressly rejects the concept of the melting pot. The manifesto even includes a seal displaying various apparent pillars of what he wants to see in society, and one of them is, quote, workers' rights, close quote. He also said he didn't know whether he was a Christian. And notwithstanding his racism, he also spoke positively of black conservative American Candace Owens and said, quote, remember, lads, subscribe to PewDiePie, close quote. He also, disgustingly, live-streamed the attack on Facebook. In response, the internet personality PewDiePie, real name Felix Kjellberg, said, quote, I feel absolutely sickened having my name uttered by this person, close quote. One of the better analyses of the motivations of the shooter and the manifesto comes from theatlantic.com in an article dated March 15 by Taylor Lorenz entitled, quote, The shooter's manifesto was designed to troll. The violent rhetoric was written for an audience, close quote. It notes that by using the phrase subscribe to PewDiePie, the shooter forced PewDiePie to respond, disavowing him. But PewDiePie is the most subscribed channel on YouTube, so the response provided further publicity for the shooter's inhuman acts. As the Atlantic article notes, quote, significant portions of the manifesto appear to be an elaborate troll, written to prey on the mainstream media's worst tendencies, close quote. The article notes that the manifesto includes ironic content that's absurd in the context of the horrific events. The shooter made clear he wanted a civil war to break out in the United States. In that context, it isn't hard to figure out what he's doing. This maniac, with all of his conflicting references in his manifesto, is trying to promote a conflict, to produce a reaction from one side, which then produces a counter-reaction from the other side. In the U.S., his hope is that the left will push to abolish the Second Amendment, and that the push will tear the country apart on racial and cultural lines. For him, the key is the division on racial lines. For those analysts who say that the killer was motivated by multiple conflicting ideologies, they're correct. But the one thing that is clear from his manifesto is that he is motivated by racism, in that he says the races must be separate. He is an ethno-nationalist. He is absolutely opposed to the concept of the melting pot. Notwithstanding a history of racism, America has always rejected ethno-nationalism, and we must continue to do so. To those who falsely claim that there is no difference between nationalism and white nationalism or ethno-nationalism, I would respond that Gandhi was a nationalist, Mandela was a nationalist, and Abraham Lincoln was a nationalist. There's nothing racist about being a nationalist, especially when the country is a democracy or republic. Those who support Donald Trump can continue to support nationalism, confident that philosophy has nothing to do with the sick and twisted philosophy of the terrorist in New Zealand. So what's the proper reaction to this event? The same thing that I've been saying from the start. We need to talk. We need to discuss what happened. The authorities need to be on the lookout for similar violent extremists in the U.S. and elsewhere. Americans who disagree about the best way to prevent or reduce the likelihood of such attacks in the future should still be able to discuss the issues. In that way, we can unify through speech, in recognition that it's our ability to speak freely that helps set us apart. Does Political Spirits manage to set itself apart from other podcasts? I hope you think so, and I look forward to speaking with you next week when I release the next episode. Until then, be sure to tell your friends about Political Spirits, and follow me on Twitter at Franklin Rye. This is Franklin Rye. Thank you for listening.